Hi there, I'm Cloud Connection, and maybe you've watched this video already. My brother and I already went through the new Pokémon of Scarlet and Violet after the games released back in 2022, although we couldn't cover absolutely everything because A, the DLC Pokémon obviously weren't out, and B, we only had gone through Gens 1 through 4, so some new evolutions of Pokémon from Gens 5 through 8 couldn't get the full coverage. Now, as this rating series and this channel comes to a close, we're gonna take a second look at the Gen 9 Pokémon and see if our opinions have changed, and we'll also wrap this whole series up by taking one big look at the franchise again. Unfortunately, since the first Gen 9 video, I may have accidentally erased most of our footage, so don't be surprised if this video is a little more slideshowy. So enough with the preamble, let's head back to Paldea for one last romp. While Sprigatito is my least favorite starter from Gen 9, it is still a pretty cute little critter.
A pretty cute cat starter. I hope that this one doesn't stand up.
What Florigato loses in cuteness points from Sprigatito, I think it makes up for in coolness points.
And it stands up. Okay, this joke makes sense now that we've covered Gen 7.
I used to think Meowscarada was a bit too showy, but I've come around to this design a lot. It's pretty sweet.
Meowscarada's grown on me as a design quite a lot since the games came out. I still think it's a bit too much into the feminine humanoid design, but it's still not bad.
Honestly, I didn't pick Fuecoco as my starter, but it's such an adorable little doofus that I think he might be my favorite from this gen.
Fuecoco is my perfect little dumb idiot child. Going into this generation, I wasn't entirely set on a starter choice, but the opening of the game sold me on him.
The Flame Sombrero is awesome, but everything else about Crocolore kinda loses me.
I'm not too big on Crocolore. Something about the hat and the vest design on its stomach just don't sit very well with me.
While I think the white is just a tad bit overbearing, Skeledirge is still a badass Pokemon.
Skeledirge is pretty cool, and I was glad to have picked Fuecoco not knowing anything about any starters' evolutions.
I instantly knew I was gonna pick Quaxly the second that first trailer dropped, and I'm glad I did because this little anime Donald Duck is pretty great.
Quaxly is actually pretty cute. If I was given less time with the starters in the opening of the game, there's a good chance I would have leant this way over Fuecoco.
Quaxwell hit that middle starter weirdness bump pretty hard, although it's certainly far from the worst.
A bit worse than Quaxly, but still a solid design nonetheless.
Again, a bit too showy for me, but maybe it's because I used this one, I've actually very much come around to Quaquavel. You go, little ducky.
What a downgrade. I would have been so disappointed if I had picked Quaquavel over Skeledirge.
This Biggie Piggy is a pretty good Pokemon, even if it's a very simple design.
Yep, it's a pig. There's nothing here to really write about.
Oinkologne is just barely the better creature over Lechonk, and yeah, it is just basically a pig, but I don't know, I like pigs. Sue me.
Not a huge fan. I don't love pigs as animals, and these designs don't even really do them justice.
Good concept, but the actual design of Tarantula just doesn't really work for me.
I always called this thing Tarantulorb since I kept forgetting the name of this while playing.
Spidops actually makes a solid improvement, and I think I didn't appreciate this one the first time around.
It's your regular Route 1 bug type that evolved early and falls off mid to late game. It's got a pretty unique design though, even among spider Pokemon.
Nimble's a pretty cute little bug, but I've already had so much trouble fighting this thing for seemingly no reason. So, you know, negative bias there.
It's kinda cute, I guess. Grasshoppers are an interesting choice for a bug as well.
This is actually a really cool bug Pokemon, a rarity for the type I find. Love the dark colors too.
Okay, this is actually really cool. Also, I thought this was a bug steel type when I first saw this and Nimble.
I don't care if the electric rodent archetype has been done to death in Pokemon already, Pawmi is still cute as hell.
Whoa! It's the Pikachu!
This is just Pawmi, but 4 legs good, 2 legs better, and I won't award points for lazy designs.
Whoa! Pikachu stood up!
I was a bit too kind to Pawmot last time, as it really doesn't change much from Pawmo, so it's gonna get the same rating now.
Whoa! Standing Pikachu turned into standing Raichu!
Tandemaus is adorable. That's all it needs to be, and it excels at being a cutie.
While the individual design is nothing interesting, the fact that there's 2 of them as one Pokemon is neat.
What if Tandemaus, but they fucked? I prefer Family of 4 form because that means they fucked more, and I respect that.
I think that Mousehold should have a splitting evolution gimmick akin to Nincada, where the 2 kid mouse move out and you end up with 2 different Tandemaus. I do prefer Family of 4 form personally.
I'm not gonna say that petting an oily, doughy dog would be pleasant, but Fido still deserves every single pet.
The goodest of good boys this generation.
I was initially hesitant to give Doxbun the full 10 points, but after really looking at it, I really, no pun intended, warmed up to this guy and his cute little knots. And it probably smells great.
The best of the best boys this generation.
Generic cute ball, but not horrible.
I don't know, it's not that cute. Maybe it's the scared anime face going on?
Actually makes a lot of tiny improvements over Smoliv that count for a lot.
Alright, this is better. Dolliv is quite a bit cuter than its pre-evolution.
It took me a little bit to get used to Arboliva's design, but once I did, I fell in love with it. It retains a lot of the great features from its previous forms, and the olive buds are a nice touch.
The olive vine / wreath design is actually pretty cool for this one.
You know, I'm not normally a fan of designs clearly based solely on a name, but man, this one is just too perfect. I like blue plumage the most because, I don't know, I like blue.
Another design that would have fit in Alola, and I wish there were more color options, but it's still a really good design for a parrot. If there was a red form, that one would be my favorite, but since there isn't, I'm choosing white plumage, as that was the first one I found and used in my playthrough.
This is just a Super Mario Galaxy power-up.
It's just a salt rock, nothing interesting about it.
This is just a Minecraft mob.
This should have been called Knackle-Stackle.
This is just a poor design. Actually, you know what? It's worse than poor. This is bad.
I think that Garganackle having such a unique design has made me appreciate it quite a bit more since release.
Aw, I actually love this little guy. He's so cute.
It's not bad, though I spent a good 75% of my Pokeballs trying to catch this when I first encountered it, and I didn't even end up using it since I had Fuecoco as my fire type.
Alright, Armor Rouge isn't that bad, but man, that gold plating is stupid.
Again, not too bad, and although I'm not a fan of the yellow armor, I think it's a bit better than Charcadet.
Now this is what I'm talking about. It's a badass upgrade, and even with the different color scheme, it carries over a lot of awesome traits from Charcadet.
I preferred this design to Armor Rouge, but it reminds me a bit too much of Gallade.
More generic cute round spheres.
He's so cute, though I thought this was like Paldean Timepole when I first saw this.
I don't hate Bellybolt, but nothing about it appeals to me in the slightest.
We've entered the territory of a Pokemon looking more like an early JRPG enemy.
Wattrel looks like it's seen some shit, man.
This gives me Fletchling vibes, which is a pretty good thing. We need more not normal flying early game bird Pokemon.
They actually made a lot of great improvements for Kilowattrel, and while the design is simple, it does a lot without getting too eccentric.
I'm not big on the Seabird design, at least not for an electric type.
Cute dog, and I love the scared and putting up a tough front face, but, you know, it is just a dog.
He's just a little pupper that's too angry for his own good.
Once again, it's just kind of a dog. Though I will say it's also the center of the saddest storyline in Scarlet and Violet, so it resonates in that regard.
I'm not really a fan of large dog breeds, including Mastiffs, but Mabostiff carried me so hard through the latter half of the game. Also, the Titan questline almost made me care for Arven, at least for his Mabostiff's sake.
I really love the colors of Shroodle, yet it looks a little too goofy for me with its tongue and pudgy body.
Poison Normal is an interesting type combination, but I thought that this was a bug type at first sight.
With the same beautiful colors and a very striking body design, I was instantly enthralled with Grafaiai when I first saw it, and I think it's a standout Pokemon from this generation.
I don't love this, but it's certainly different than any other monkey Pokemon we've seen up to this point.
I kinda like Bramblin, yet I don't think it's that interesting of a design, just brambles and floating eyes.
Tumbleweed is an interesting inspiration for a Pokemon design, but I wish it wasn't Grass Ghost. Maybe ground or flying instead of ghost?
The same, but, I don't know, a little bit cooler?
This really doesn't look any different than Bramblin.
Aw shit, he be walking.
Nope. When I first saw this on the map, I hated it. It's the legs. Tentacool should not be walking around like this.
Look, I think Toadskool and Toadskruel are stupid, but I can't deny something about Toadskruel appeals to me. Probably the fact that Tentacruel is an incredibly good Pokemon to begin with.
Toadskruel is a bit better, but I still don't really like it.
I'd give Cloth a higher rating if it wasn't for the tufts of hair on its limbs and head. They just don't look right.
Somebody went under a dock, and there they saw a rock. It wasn't a rock.
I really like the idea of basing a Pokemon on spicy peppers, but Capsakid's design doesn't really do it for me.
Capsakid is a neat idea, but I think it's kinda ugly.
Scovillain's a bit better thanks to the green and red contrast, but not by much. Though I will say, the name is perfect.
The grass fire type for a hot pepper Pokemon is such a nice idea, but I'm not too keen on the design itself.
I know it's gross, but does anyone else think Relor's Mudball looks kinda tasty? It looks like a donut hole with sprinkles, and it's making me hungry.
Dung beetle? I mean, interesting choice, but I'm not a fan.
I've definitely cooled a bit on Rapska. I used to think it was amazing, but I don't know if it deserves that much praise anymore. Still, it's good.
It's a bit more interesting, but still not great in my opinion.
Cute, but not particularly interesting.
It's like an egg, I think?
Espaffra's too weird for me, sorry. Love that dyed Edna Mode hairstyle though.
I normally kinda like some abstract Pokemon designs, but Espathra looks hideous in my eyes.
Not bad.
It's just a little baby. With a big hammer. Big hammer not pictured.
When Tinkatink gets tough, Tinkatuff gets going.
This design isn't spectacular, but Tinkatuff helped me through a lot of the early game with its fairy steel typing.
The big ass hammer is a plus, and I've actually come around on the hair this time.
I think Tinkaton is actually kinda cute, though this should not be nearly as fast as it is.
Not that Wiglet is a terrible redesign or anything, but I was far too kind on this one before. It's lazy and unacceptable. Still kinda cute though.
Okay, this is just a Diglett. They really shouldn't have just made this Diglett.
Contrary to Wiglet, this at least tried to make Dugtrio different. Whether it succeeded or not, I applaud the effort.
And I don't think making them red is any better.
Great name, great concept, unfortunately just a good design.
When a Pokémommy and a Pokédaddy fall in love, a Bombardier drops an egg on top of them in the daycare center, and that's where new Pokémon come from.
Even though it's just a dolphin, dolphins are great, and it's high time they made a dolphin Pokemon anyway.
It took far too long for Game Freak to add a dolphin, having missed the perfect opportunity in Alola to do so, but Finizen is just the perfect dolphin Pokemon.
I love the idea of Palafin becoming a buff hero, but I think the design of the hero form itself is a bit too silly. I do prefer it over the Zero form though, because, well, it's not just Finizen with a tattoo.
While the Zero form is just Finizen, very good, the hero form just isn't that great, and looks almost like a joke to me. I prefer Zero form, obviously.
Am I the only one who thinks Varoom is really cute? Props for making a car engine look actually kind of adorable.
It's not bad, but I'm a bit surprised it took this long to make a car Pokemon, when Pokemon like Porygon and Rotom already exist.
They lost me a little bit by making it not as cute, and it's not a great design, though I do love how ridiculous the Starmobiles are, so it gets a pass.
Okay, this just looks funnier than Varoom, and both of them have great names for their designs.
Cyclizar is fine, just a little too bland for me personally.
Okay, this design actually slaps. I'm not sure what it is specifically about this, but it just works for me.
Orthworm's a silly little guy, and unfortunately not outstanding in my opinion.
I'm not a huge fan of this design, but the fact that it punches things with its, 6 fists is funny.
Glimmet looks a lot more like an item than an actual creature, and honestly, I find it very boring.
Glimmet is a very weird design, and I'm not so sure what it's trying to be, but I guess I don't really dislike it.
Definitely an improvement, and less boring, but my previous criticism applies for Glimmora as well.
Never in 100 guesses would I have thought this or Glimmet were rock poison type. I'd have guessed every combination regarding water, fairy, psychic, or dragon first.
Far from the best dog Pokemon, but Greavard is still a good little boy nonetheless.
The dog is dead, and we're at 3 domestic dog designs for this generation, which is a bit much for me.
Houndstone, pal, you gotta get that underbite checked out.
It's mostly just a bigger Greavard, but the tombstone head ornament is kinda funny.
It's probably my love of flamingos that makes me rate Flamigo this high, because otherwise it's a very basic design.
Flamigo no es amigo, pero se ve bien.
Okay, it's another cute sphere, but they made it 100 times bigger, so I don't know, I like it more.
A land whale Pokemon is a real cool idea I thought would be reserved for a fossil, but I'm not a fan of the baby-like features of this design.
What if Citadel, but bigger?
If Cetitan was longer like Wailord is, I think I'd really like this design, but as it stands, it's a mostly alright Pokemon.
I don't think the pink fins fit perfectly with the rest of Veluza's design, but otherwise I think it's a really cool Pokemon.
I don't quite get the psychic typing, but something about this Pokemon sticks out to me. Maybe it's the fact that Paldea didn't introduce too many new water types, and having not picked Quaxly, my options were kinda limited in new choices.
Something about catfish really appealed to me, and Dondozo, being a catfish, naturally hits that for me as well.
This is 8 feet shorter than Werelord, but nearly half the weight. We got another contender for floatiest Pokemon.
Sushi Fish Boy is cute, but not really spectacular. I like the curly form because it actually has a two-toned palette, unlike the others which are too plain.
It's just a little sushi thing, and I think I like Droopy form the most because of the name. It doesn't lie, Tatsuguri do be droopy.
It's awesome seeing a completely different design related to such an iconic Pokemon, but even disregarding that, I really like Annihilape.
Something about this design really sticks out to me, at least compared to Primeape. Oh, and Dead Monkey.
I know it's just Tauros but shadowified, but I actually think that makes it look a little cooler. Honestly, all the different Paldean Tauros forms are pretty similar, so I'll say the Blaze Breed form is my favorite.
I don't like it as much as Cantonian Tauros, but it's not bad at all. I think I prefer the Blaze Breed the most, but they are all pretty similar to each other.
The subtle differences make this just a little bit worse than Johto Wooper, but it is still a cute, squishy little boy.
It's the little whoopee boy, but this time he's poop-colored. Pooper.
Maybe biased because I also used Clodsire all through my Scarlet playthrough, but hell, I still love this guy.
I can't believe that they just took Quagsire, painted him Paldean Wooper colored, and rotated him, and they got away with calling it a different Pokemon.
Alright, this redesign I can actually get behind. I think it looks different enough to be given a pass. Plus, it looks like it's wearing a onesie.
A definite improvement over Girafarig, and once again Game Freak gives some love to a mostly forgotten Pokemon.
I'm cool with new regional evolutions of old Pokemon, but just stitching two Dunsparce together and calling it a day is too lazy for me. I don't care for either form, but I'll guess I'll give it to 2-segment form because there's less of it.
I really like how Game Freak decided to give some love to some returning Pokemon in the more recent generations, and although the Dunsparce is silly, it's just a bigger Dunsparce. I think I prefer 3-segment form because it's just more the Dunsparce.
Just a bit too intricate for me, but the Poniard line is pretty cool, so hey, it's good in my book.
It's a pretty busy design, and evolving this was a bit of a pain, but it's not all that bad. I don't like that it sits on its hair though.
The spikes and red tufts actually make this ancient Donphan look pretty cool.
It's a more visually interesting Donphan, but it's still a Donphan in the end.
Damn Jigglypuff, who did your hair? It is looking stylish as heck.
This looks like it wants to speak to the manager.
I like Brute Bonnet fine enough, but while I originally thought it looked kinda beautiful, I'm now just sort of pleased with the design, if you get my meaning.
What ecological niche could a Pokeball disguise provide for Brute Bonnet? Or does this confirm that Pokeball designs are based off of ancient Amoonguss?
Maybe this is just Mischievous but with bigger tufts of hair, but I really like it.
I'm not huge on the design compared to Mischievous, but I'm more annoyed that it took me literal hours to find duplicates of this Pokemon for trading when I found my first in a total of 30 seconds.
Now we have gotten to Volcarona, and yeah, Slitherwing is still incredible.
I love Volcarona, and while this is still a great design, I don't think it's as amazing as its descendant.
Okay, this one's pretty damn stupid.
Ah, yes, the mystical ancient Magnets. A very odd choice for an ancient Pokemon to design.
Huh.
Not for me. This looks like a boss from a Pokestar Studios movie.
I already don't care that much for Delibird, and this future version doesn't improve it in any way.
It's neat that Game Freak is giving some love to Delibird, and I'm glad that this wasn't an ancient Pokemon, which would imply that Santa existed millions of years ago.
What if Hariyama, but designed by Dr. Eggman?
While I generally prefer Scarlet's ancient designs, and I'm not a big fan of Iron Hands to begin with, it has carried me through a lot of Terra raids, so props for that.
It's a bit too sharp for me, sorry to say.
Iron Jugulus is fine, I guess? Maybe it's because Hydreigon already takes some inspiration from artificial sources.
It's not quite as good as its past counterpart, but it's still pretty damn cool.
This one looks fine at least, though the poison type surprises me a lot with this one.
The 3D model doesn't do justice to Iron Thorns, as it's actually a pretty solid robotification of Tyranitar.
Okay, this one just is a Pokestar Studios boss. Like, this is legitimately just MT from Pokestar Studios.
I'm not exactly sure what Frigibax is based off of, but it looks kinda cute.
It's not that bad, but it's also not that good either.
Something is a little bit off about Arctivax to me, but it's still a very solid design and avoids that second stage weirdness for the most part.
It's certainly different than Frigibax, but I still am pretty indifferent to it.
I almost want to give Baxcalibur the 10, yet I held off it because I think the smoother body shape does this a disservice. If it went back to the more angular designs of earlier generations, it'd easily be worthy of a perfect score.
This reminds me too much of Duraludon, and it's neither intimidating nor friendly enough compared to other pseudo-legendaries.
Making a Pokemon out of a Mimic is a cool idea, yet I just don't care for how Gimmighoul looks.
It's a unique design that kinda reminds me of Yamask and Cofagrigus, but running around trying to collect its coins was not fun. I prefer chest form, as I think the whole Mimic idea is pretty neat.
I don't get how you arrived to this from Gimmighoul, and honestly, I wouldn't like it even if I did get it.
I like it, and despite the Japanese name, I do not like that the String Cheese Man surfs.
It's great to see a nature spirit-like design here, and I really love Wo-Chien. Very Miyazaki-esque.
It's a snail, but not an interesting one.
Well, this is an interesting little creature. It looks amazing, but not exactly Pokemon-like, and I like that very design.
This is just Tai Lung from Kung Fu Panda.
Not a fan of this one.
It's not bad, I guess, and I think we need more deer/elk/moose inspired designs in Pokemon.
Damn, the eyes on Chi-Yu really ruin it. They're way too distracting from what's otherwise a good Pokemon.
I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. 252 plus special attack, choice spec, speeds of ruin, Terrafire, Chi-Yu, overheat versus 252 HP, 252 plus special defense, toxic specs in Sun, 268 to 316, 88.1 to 103.9%, guaranteed 1-hit KO after Stealth Rock.
This one's doing a bit too much, but I can't deny that it's a pretty cool remix of Salamence.
I think this design would be better if the wings were truly feathered like Ho-Oh's wings are, but it's still interesting that this is based off of Mega Salamence.
I guess it's a little bit better than Gallade? Maybe?
This one is pretty cool, and I guess this is also interesting that it is based off of both Mega Gallade and Gardevoir.
I like Koraidon a little bit more between the two, but honestly, I'm not a big fan of the mascot legendaries this time.
This is probably the first generation where I had no strong feelings one way or another regarding box legendaries, which is usually how I make my choices when picking a game. Koraidon basically being a big dog increases its score just a little though.
While I personally like the colors on Miraidon more, the body design brings it down to just below Koraidon.
Again, I had no strong feelings one way or another with Koraidon and Miraidon, and basing solely on design, I'm not a huge fan of Miraidon.
Will there ever be a more metal Pokemon name than Walking Wake? Anyway, although the idea of Suicune becoming a dinosaur is admittedly silly, I can't deny that Walking Wake looks pretty solid.
While this is a really sleek design for a prehistoric Suicune, I don't like that it invalidates the whole feline versus canine debate on what the legendary beasts were based off of, as apparently they're dinosaurs.
I wouldn't call this an upgrade of Virizion, but it's a pretty good redesign. And hey, the boots make sense.
5G. Only with Virizion.
Somebody stabbed my Applin! I like the candy apple design this time, but I don't know, this one doesn't have the same magic.
It's not terrible, and the candied apple design is a unique way to take an Applin evolution, but it feels like it's missing something.
Poltegeist already impressed me quite a bit, and Poltergeist is more of the same, but with matcha tea instead. Again, the forms don't matter, but artisan form is better.
I don't think it's as interesting as Sinistee, and I think I'd prefer if the naming convention was the same, Sinistcha evolving into Poltergeist. They're pretty much the same, but I prefer the rarer artisan form.
What the hell is Slimer doing in my teacup? I don't like Sinistcha as much, but I think it's ingenious that instead of a cup evolving into a pot, the pot becomes the cup this time. Because that's the natural steps you take when you drink tea.
Sinistcha is a bit too goofy looking compared to Poltergeist, though I've never had matcha so I can't really compare the two too much. I still prefer artisan form.
Dumb name, goofy JoJo furry design. The only thing I can think of when I see this Pokemon is okie dokie.
There is nothing okie dokie about this Pokemon.
Alright, I actually kinda like this one. I don't know why.
There is nothing hunky-dory about this Pokemon.
We've already made too many Kung Fu Panda references in this rating series already, so I'll just say that Pheasantipity is very beautiful.
Okay, I can't think of a good way to work serendipity or serendipitous into this rating like the last two, but I also don't think this design is all that bad. The white adds some much needed contrast to the color palette.
Ogerpon has the 4 boss remains, so now it can summon the Giants and fight the Skull Kid. I prefer the Cornerstone mask form myself, because Giants mask.
I wasn't a huge fan of this design at first, but it's pretty cute. While I like the colors of the Hearthflame mask the most, I think my favorite form is Wellspring mask form, mostly due to the design of the mask itself.
You remember how King Womp in Super Mario 64 talked about being used as construction material for roads and buildings? That's what this reminds me of. You could build a bridge out of this mon, I bet.
Bridges. Bridges are cooler than skyscrapers.
Hello, Pocket Monsters! I bring you greetings from Apple World!
Hydrapple is just cool. I like Flapple because it's pretty funny, but this is a design that I think fully encapsulates a worm in an apple. Or rather, several worms.
Another pretty metal name, but while I guess it's a fine redesign of Entei, it's way too busy for its own good.
This is just a Styracosaurus Entei. Like, you take away the crest and you almost just have Entei's body shape. At least Walking Wake and Raging Bolt have drastically different silhouettes.
I never thought I'd say this, but can we go back to regular Raikou?
I complained about them in the Gen 2 video, but I guess Raikou's saber teeth and distinct claws come from being based off of dinosaurs instead of cats.
This wouldn't look out of place at KB Toys in the early 2000s next to all those other robotic dog toys.
I don't really have any strong feelings regarding Iron Boulder. I think I've said this before, I don't like that the future Paradox Pokemon are just metallic versions of existing Pokemon designs.
It's alright, I suppose. But now in robot form!
The fact that almost every design element of the original Pokemon can be pinpointed in pretty much all future Paradox Pokemon feels lazy to me.
This actually looks both adorable and badass. It's great that they ended, almost, on a perfect Pokemon, and I love how in the normal form, his body is just a Chaos Emerald. I adore all the forms, but the Terastal form might be my favorite.
Yeah, it's a turtle. I'm not huge on terastallization as a battle gimmick, so I don't care too much about Terapagos. I think my favorite form is Terastal form, since normal form looks silly, and stellar form is way too over-designed.
Pecharunt is clearly the evilest of all Pokemon because it makes everybody do the chicken dance, a diabolical scheme on par with the Yolkians. Cha-cha-cha.
Pecharunt is strange, but I think it'd be funny if they added more berry-based Pokemon for the other status-clearing berries. Chesto-Runt, Cherry-Runt, Aspear-Runt, Rost-Runt, and Lum-Runt.
Alright, that's every Pokemon from Gen 9 rated. Again! As per usual, let's take it over to Dribson for the breakdown.
Thanks, Cloud. First, let's make our final updates to our running totals. Cloud's new average score for Gen 9 is 6.38, which means it ties with Gen 8 on his list. My new average score is 6.03, improving slightly from my original ratings, but still making this my second worst generation just behind Gen 2. Of the 122 new Pokemon and Paldean forms from this generation, we gave 26 of them the same rating with our new scores, which is actually just one less than the last time. Next, let's look at our total score counts for Gen 9. And although the trends didn't really change all that much, i.e. we still hovered around the 5 to 8 range and Cloud was overall more positive, the minute details have obviously changed a bit. Notably, Cloud actually handed out some 1s this time, and I handed out more 8s and 9s.
Thanks, Dribson, and now it's time, as usual, for the awards for this generation to celebrate the top and bottom Pokemon from the Paldea region. First up is the award for best and worst starters, based on the combined average scores of each starter line. The Perfect Partner Award goes to the Skeledirge line, even with our overall dislike of Crocolar, Fuecoco and Skeledirge more than made up for it. And the Atrocious Ally Award has shifted, as it's now going to the Quaquaval line. This line actually didn't lose any points despite some rating changes, but thanks to both of us liking Meowscarada more now, that line bumped up to second place.
Moving on to the awards for best and worst legendary Pokemon based on our combined scores. Our mythical masterpiece this time is Xianpao, a very striking design that absolutely deserves this award. And our Fantastical Flop Award goes to Okidogi, whose name infuriated me, and who we both really didn't care for all that much.
Now we have the awards for best and worst types, and Gen 9's Excellent Element Award goes to Fairy, which has been pretty mediocre overall, even losing in Gen 4, but which really swung for the fences this time, and it paid off. And the Catastrophic Category Award goes to Rock for the second time, which did get a bit of a bump with our new ratings, but not enough to make a difference.
Then, we've got the awards for best and worst glow-up, determined by finding the biggest score differences between one evolution to the next. Our Terrific Transformation Award goes to Hydrapple, who made some serious improvements over Diplin and somewhat corrected the faults of this new Applin evolution for 8 additional points. And our Metamorphic Mistake Award goes to Crocolore, who lost 8 points off of Fuecoco. By this point, it's obvious that the later generation middle starters fare terribly, and as Crocolore technically started this trend in our first Gen 9 video, It's fitting that he is the last to get this award as well.
Moving on, we have the award for the Pokemon that Dribson and I disagreed on the most. Our Contentious Critter Award goes to Raging Bolt, whom I absolutely obliterated with a score of 1, but whom Dribson marveled over with a rating of 8. This was kind of shocking, no pun intended, for us both, but hey, that's what happens when two opinionated Pokemon fans come together.
Our next award is for the best and worst antagonists, aka the best rival, gym leader, elite four trainer, champion, or villain team leader based on the team's average combined score. The rules are the same as always. Duplicate Pokemon only count once, we're judging on final teams only where applicable, trainers must have at least one new Pokemon, super bosses only count if they're fought exclusively in the post-game, and no Battle Facility exclusive trainers. Unlike last time, we are counting the Academy Ace Tournament trainers since that's not exactly a battle facility like we initially thought it was. And since we've rated all the Pokemon now, we can actually consider every single trainer this time, including the DLC ones. Gen 9's Big Bad Boss Award goes to Penny, or Cassiopeia, because having 6 of the best evolutions on your team is a surefire way to win our hearts. And the Bad Boss Award goes to Professor Turo, a consequence of our lower ratings for the future Paradox Pokemon. It should be noted that Turo's battle is Violet exclusive, and if we're only considering dual game fights, then Atticus, the Team Star Poison Leader, gets this award instead.
And before we move on to the special honors, we are introducing a unique award for Gen 9 to recognize the best and worst Paldean regional Pokemon. For our purposes, we're including Paldean exclusive forms, which is really only Paldean, Wooper, and Tauros, plus the Paradox Pokemon since they're based on previous designs. The Pleasant Paldean Award goes to Slitherwing, which is based on a Pokemon we both really love, so that's not a surprise. And the Pitiful Paldean Award goes to Iron Hands, a cheap robotic imitation of a classic design. Now let's get on to the Special Recognition Awards for the Best, Worst, and Best Worst Pokemon. The Hall of Fame hosts Pokemon who have a perfect combined score of 20, and Doxbun joins the ranks this time, the third dog to do so. The Hall of Shame is for those who have a perfectly bad combined score of 2, but we didn't agree on any losers, so no one was eligible. And the Hall of Tame is awarded to Pokemon who got a score of 5 from us both, and thanks to Dribson's new scoring, Gimmighoul is now the sole honoree, as Chi-Yu and Iron Valiant are no longer applicable. So that's every Pokemon from Gen 9 rated again, and as a quick recap, here's all of our new scores from this generation. When we first looked at Gen 9 right after its release, I came to the conclusion that it was just more Pokemon, and I stand by that. It was a fairly mixed bag generation for me as far as the actual Pokemon went, and now that I'm even farther away from my playthrough of Pokemon Scarlet, my opinions on a lot of these Pokemon have been solidified. Most of my rating changes were minor score adjustments, and there are very few creatures that I've changed my mind on since 2022. Of course, the ratings are just a hook to get you onto this video at the end of it. We're not really making any kind of objective, qualitative statement on this or any other Pokemon game. But now that I've digested Gen 9, it mostly held up to my original expectations.
Scarlet and Violet are weird games for me. I won't fully reiterate my thoughts on them from the original video, but to summarize, I didn't care for the first 98% of the base game, primarily due to the game's lackluster performance, though the last hour within Area Zero was one of the best finales in the entire series. The DLC is also a bit strange. The Teal Mask was a pretty good and concise story, though I feel next to no reason to head back to Kitakami since I've completed the Pokédex. The Indigo Disc wasn't all that great story-wise to me, but has plenty of reasons to return to Blueberry Academy. The two together, however, didn't mesh well for me and was kinda disappointing. The Mochi Mayhem epilogue was fine but not spectacular, and the hidden cutscene after the Terrapago storyline at Kitakami's Crystal Pool was really nice. Overall, I think that Scarlet and Violet are way too ambitious for the development timeframe the games had, though I do hope that future games are able to fully improve upon these.
But we're not done yet. Now that we've rated every single Pokemon in the franchise, to date, let's break down the entire series. My average score across the entire franchise was 6.30 out of 10, while Dribson's was 6.39 out of 10, so while we definitely disagreed on several individual creatures, our overall opinion seemed more or less the same. Figure that. That means our total average score was 12.68 out of 10, and no, that is not a mistake, that's just how the rounding worked.
Next, here's all our generations ranked by our individual scores. What's interesting here is that Cloud and I had fairly inverse opinions on these generations as a whole. For example, my top scoring Gen 6 was second last on Cloud's list, while his favorite Gen 3 didn't crack my top half. With that taken into account, let's rank the generations by our combined average scores. Gen 7 and 8 tied for last, followed by Gen 9, Gen 2, Gen 5, Gen 1, Gen 4, Gen 6, and finally Gen 3. Keep in mind that these are solely based on the Pokémon, and we are not saying that these are the best Pokémon games, even if the creatures are somewhat of an indicator of that generation's overall quality.
Now let's talk about the starter Pokémon, specifically ranking all the Grass, Fire, and Water starter Pokémon lines by their combined scores. First, here's all the ranked Grass starter lines, and keep in mind, these scores are out of a possible 60. From worst to best, we have Chestnut, Superior, a tie between Venusaur and Rillaboom, Meganium, a three-way tie of Sceptile, Torterra, and Decidueye, and our surprise winner, Meowscarada. I am honestly shocked that the Grass Cat was our favorite grass starter overall, and keep in mind, it was our worst in our initial look at Gen 9, and only improved once we looked back. Still, the grass starters overall tended to be our least favorite, so it's not a glowing endorsement.
As for the fire Pokémon, they tended to get much better scores. Starting from the bottom, we have Emboar and Delphox tied for last, then Incineroar, Charizard, a tie between Cinderace and Skeledirge, Infernape, Typhlosion, and our beloved flaming chicken, Blaziken, which was also our favorite starter line across the franchise.
Finally, let's round out with the water Pokémon, which contains our least favorite starter line. That'd be Inteleon, followed by Greninja, another three-way tie of Feraligatr, Samurott, and Primarina, then Quaquaval, a tie between Blastoise and Swampert, and by a large margin, Empoleon. So I guess if Pokemon Legends ZA is doing another mixed trio of starters, we'd recommend Meowscarada, Blaziken, and Empoleon, which isn't great since that's two birds and a cat, but whatever.
Before we move on from the starters, let's see which generational starter sets are the best and which ones are best left behind, out of a possible combined score of 180. Coming in last is Gen 6, then Gen 8, Gen 1, Gen 7, Gen 2, then a tie between Gen 5 and 9, then Gen 3, and finally Gen 4. Clearly the starter lines hit their stride in the middle, and then have had inconsistent performance since Gen 6.
Now let's talk about some legendary and mythical Pokemon, and don't worry, we're not going to highlight all 105 of them because we don't have all day, but let's talk about the top and bottom 4 out of a best score of 20. For the legendaries, we have Giratina, Megadanchi, and Galarian Moltres all tied at 18 points, and then Rayquaza triumphing over all with a perfect score of 20. There's a lot of majesty and beauty in all of these designs, and they are well worth their title of legendary. For our bottom 4, we first have a tie between Eternatus and Okidogi at 6 points, so I guess this is a bottom 5, then Melmetal and Zamazenta at 5 points, and our absolute least favorite one of all, Gigantamax Melmetal, who got the worst possible score of 2. Melmetal obviously rubbed us the wrong way no matter what he did, but with the other Pokemon, it's more a case of not doing enough, or in Eternatus' case, just being confusing.
We also wanted to find out which box legendary Pokemon sets were the best, so we've calculated the average score of every creature you can find on the box art. As an aside, this is just talking about the mainline games and legendary Pokemon, so Venusaur and Charizard aren't considered for Gen 3 as part of Fire Red and Leaf Green, and Gen 1 isn't getting a score at all since Blue, Red, and Yellow don't have any legendaries on the package. Out of a possible average score of 20, we have Gen 8 at the bottom, then Gen 9, Gen 2, Gen 7, Gen 5, Gen 6, Gen 4, and finally Gen 3. Call it nostalgia if you want, but the bottom line is, the Weather Trio is awesome because we say so.
Moving on to the best and worst types across the entire franchise, at least as far as the Pokemon are concerned. From worst to best out of a possible score of 20, we have Psychic, Rock, Poison, Fairy, Steel, Electric, Fighting, Bug, Grass, Normal, Ground, Water, Ice, Flying, Dark, Dragon, Ghost, and finally, Fire. Many of these types have been up and down throughout the series, but our bottom types and top types seem pretty consistent with our favorite and least favorites from each generation.
Before we move on from the types, we also wanted to find out which ones were our most contentious, as in, the ones that Cloud and I agreed and disagreed on the most. Our 3 most contentious types were Water and Grass with a point difference of 0.45 between the two of us, and Ghost in the top slot with a difference of 0.61. Our 3 least contentious types were Psychic at 0.07, Poison at 0.06, and Fire at 0.05. While there aren't that many drastic differences between our scoring, I find it interesting that our two best rated types exist on both ends of the contention scale, which means that if Cloud cared more for the ghost types, it could have easily taken the top slot.
Now, we've gathered a lot of data about the trainers in this franchise, so let's talk about the best and the worst. Again, these are out of 20 maximum points, and if they weren't eligible for our awards based on our criteria, they're not getting listed here. Sorry, Red. And unlike the Big Boss Awards, we are separating everyone into categories. First are the rivals, and since their teams change depending on which starter Pokemon they have and what game you're playing, we are only counting their best and worst teams. Our 5 worst rivals are Kyurem and Teal Mask at 11.83, Bianca with either a Serperior or Emboar at 10.75, Hop with Rillaboom or Inteleon in Pokemon Sword with 10.50, Cheren with Serperior or Emboar at 9.75, and finally Hugh with an Emboar at 9.25. Clearly, the 5th generation had some of the worst to offer in terms of rivals, and it's interesting to see Kyurem on this list considering how recent the Gen 9 DLC is. We do want to note that Kieran's worst team is actually 15th last out of the list of 65, and if we weren't solely counting unique teams, then only Hugh and Cheren would be in the bottom 5.
As for the 5 best rivals, we've got Caleb and Serena with either a Greninja or Chestnut at 15.40, then Hau and Sun and Moon with Decidueye at 15.75, Barry with Torterra at 15.83, then a tie between Trevor and Gladion at 16 flat, and finally, Brendan and May from Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire with a Blaziken at 16.60. Technically, Gladion has 2 different teams, one from Sun and Moon and the other from the Ultra Games, but they got the same score, and they also tied with Brendan and May's Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire team with Sceptile, so overall, it's more of a competitive cluster.
Now, let's talk about the gym leaders, and for our purposes, the trial captains from Gen 7 and the wardens from Legends Arceus fall under this category as well. For our 5 worst gym leaders, we have a tie between Misty and Roxy at 10 flat, then Koga at 9.67, then a big tie between Brock, Tate and Liza, Ceylon, and Chili at 9.50, then Skyla at 8.66, and finally Roxanne with a significant low of 8 points. I know some of you might be teething that both Brock and Misty are in our bottom 5, but that's just how the numbers worked.
And for our top 5 gym leaders, we've got Drayden from Black 2 White 2 at 16 flat, a tie between Crasher Wake and Lana from the Ultra Games at 16.33, then Claire at 16.67, Blaine at 17.25, and Kiawe from the Ultra Games at an astonishing 18.66. Fire reigns supreme over the gyms, it seems, and it should be noted that Kiawe's Sun and Moon team technically ties with Drayden.
Let's keep it going with the best and worst Elite 4 members. Our bottom 5 Elite 4 team starts with Wickstrom at 11.75, then Will at 11.50, Olivia from Sun and Moon at 10.20, Marshall at 10 flat, and finally Bruno from Gen 2 at 9.80. The Elite 4 members generally fared a little better score-wise, and even these ones have their standout Pokemon. By the way, Bruno's Gen 1 team technically should take the 4th worst slot, but again, we're not counting trainers more than once.
And for the best Elite 4 members, we've got Glacia at 16 points, then Flint at 16.20, Karen at 16.40, Lance at 16.50, and finally Kahili from the Ultra Games at 16.80. 3 of our top 5 Elite 4 trainers are the final encounter before the champion fight, which is pretty appropriate. In an astonishing coincidence, Kahili also takes the 4th best slot tied with Flint, but the same rule applies. And since she's a golfer, I guess you could say that she belongs to the Elite 4.
Wow, Dribson, that was a terrible joke that you definitely wrote. And speaking of jokes, let's talk about the best and worst champions. Our 3 worst champions are Alder at 13.40, then N from Black and White at 12.83, and finally Geeta at 12.33. N does technically ascend to champion status during the events of Black and White, and sullies the Pokemon League even further, although not by much considering Alder wasn't that great.
Now for our 3 best champions. Cynthia at 16.16, Wallace at 16.33, and a tie for first between Diantha and Professor Kukui with a Decidueye at 16.66. Technically, Cynthia's team from Black and White trounces every other champion, but her Gen 4 team still secured a nice spot. And it's amazing how 2 late franchise champions nailed it with a great selection of older and newer Pokemon.
Our last big category is the villain team leaders, and for clarity, we're only talking about the head honchos. Any second in commands or admins aren't counted here. We counted 10 throughout the series, so for the bottom 5, we've got Getsus from Black and White 2 at 14.66, Giovanni at 14.25, Ya Boy Guzma at 14 flat, Lysander at 13.75, and finally Piers at 12.75. I don't think it's uncommon to say that the later villain teams leave something to be desired, and it's also fun to see the OG Giovanni down this low.
Continuing straight on to the top 5, we've got Charm at 15 flat, Maxie at 15.33, Penny at 16.33, Archie at 17 flat, and finally Cyrus at 17.20. Nice to see some of the newer villains get their flowers, and considering Cyrus wants to create a whole new dimension which is pretty badass for a villain scheme, it makes sense that he'd come out on top.
We've still got one more trainer set to cover, that being all the miscellaneous trainers, which is just every other notable trainer that we haven't already covered. For our bottom 5 miscellaneous trainers, we've got Professor Turo at 10.50, Rude at 10 flat, Mars at 9 flat, Morimoto from Black and White at 8 flat, and the bottom of the barrel Faba from the Ultra Games at 7.33. Faba's Ultra team is the worst trainer we tracked through the entire franchise, and his Sun and Moon team isn't much better, actually tying with Morimoto.
And for our top 5 miscellaneous trainers, we've got Director Clavel with a Meowscarada at 15.83, a tie between Shelly and Zinzalin at 16 flat, then Lusamine at 16.40, Adamant at 16.66, and finally Cynthia from Black and White 2 at 17.50. Considering how many nightmares Cynthia gave Black White 2 players with her fantastic team, it's fitting that she'd be high on the list in addition to being a top tier champion.
Okay, that's enough about the trainers for now, although we'll be back to them in a bit. Let's talk about the regional forms, by which we mean the non-battle gimmick forms, which we'll also get to in a bit. From worst to best based on their average combined scores out of a possible 20, we've got the Alolan forms at 12.44, then the Paldean forms and Paradox Pokemon at 12.55, the Galarian forms at 13.16, and finally the Hisuian forms at 13.78. Again, this also includes new region-specific evolutions of previous Pokemon, and while every region has their standout unique forms, it seems they definitely got better as the series evolved.
Let's also see which specific regional forms improved and de-improved the most over the original Pokemon. And for this, we're just considering new designs, not new evolutions, with the Paradox Pokemon being the sole exception. We'll just be highlighting the best and worst of each form, so for Alolan forms, we've got Marowak improving by 6 points and Dugtrio losing 9 points. Then there's Galarian, Mr. Mime, and Moltres at 6 points, and Slowpoke, Ponyta, and Meowth at -3 points. Next is Hisuian, Typhlosion, and Zoroark at 3 points, and Arcanine, Braviary, and Avalugg at -4 points. And finally, there's Brute Bonnet with 2 points, and Iron Treads and Iron Thorns at -7 points.
Now, as for the battle gimmicks, let's rank those as well. All 2 of them. We've got the Gigantamax forms at 11.58, and the Mega forms at 13.72. We just didn't like that most of the Gigantamax Pokemon are just take Mon, resize, profit, as the Mega forms at least tried to stand out.
For our best and worst battle gimmick glow-ups, there's a big tie between Mega Pidgeot, Medicham, Banette, Lopunny, and Diancie at 4 points, and Mega Sharpedo with a whopping -10 points. And then we have Gigantamax Butterfree at 2 points, and Gigantamax Kingler and Snorlax at -6 points.
Okay, here's something that's pretty fun. We're going to assemble our ideal Pokemon League by listing our top champion, best 4 Elite 4 members, and our 8 best gym leaders, but we're only picking 1 trainer per type to keep in line with how the series normally works. The best Elite 4 member goes to the 4th slot, then the next 3 go to slots 3, 2, and 1, and then the best gym leader with a unique type becomes gym leader 8, then 7, 6, and so on. Starting with the champion, we are nominating Diantha. Yes, she did tie with Professor Kukui for our rating series, but since Kukui had the worst Pokemon among the 2 of them, we eliminated him. He can be the Pokemon Professor for this league as a consolation. Anyway, for our Elite 4, we already kind of revealed our top 4 earlier, but here they are again. Working backwards, we have the Flying type Kahili from the Ultra Games, the Dragon type Lance, the Dark type Karen, and the Fire type Flint.
As for our gym leaders, also working backwards, we have the Water type Lana, the Ice type Grusha, the Ground type Hapu, the Rock type Grant, the Fighting type Bee, the Ghost type Acerola from Sun and Moon, the Electric type Volkner, and the Steel type Jasmine. This would make for a fairly interesting league progression-wise. Accounting for any necessary changes in levels and team strength, Steel as the first gym would be insane, even worse than the trend of rock-type gyms in Gens 1, 3, and 4. Ghost earlier is also interesting, given the general oversaturation of normal-type moves up until after the third gym in most games. The rest of the gyms are generally fine, though. The Elite Four and Champion would be swept by a single Water Fairy-type Pokemon with sufficient Ice-type coverage, with the sole exceptions of Lance's Gyarados and Diantha's Mega Gardevoir. And in case you were wondering about the types that didn't make the Pokemon League, our top trainers for them are Viola for Bug, Norman for Normal, Mina from the Ultra Games for Fairy, Janine for Poison, Olympia for Psychic, and Ramos for Grass.
Now, all throughout this series, we were tracking the Pokemon who received a score of 10, 5, and 1 from the two of us in our Hall of Fame, Hall of Tame, and Hall of Shame. And we decided to take those Pokemon and further dissect them a bit. As a reminder for our Hall of Fame Pokemon, we've got Arcanine, Houndoom, Milotic, Rayquaza, Galvantula, Volcarona, Hisuian Typhlosion, and Doxbun. Fire types and dogs definitely won out the day, and the fact that we'd use these Pokemon regularly in our playthroughs definitely had an influence. Dribson and I ranked all 8 of these Pokemon individually, and as you can see, we both put Arcanine and Milotic as the cream of the crop, even if we didn't exactly agree on where they should lie.
As for the Hall of Shame, that includes Smoochum, Mime Jr., Bruxish, and Gigantamax Melmetal. Considering 3 of these are Psychic types, it's no wonder Psychic was our least favorite throughout the series. Now, here's our rankings for these worst of the worst, and it's a bit more complex when you compare them side by side. It's odd how we completely disagreed on Bruxish, although just because I ranked it highest on my list here does not mean I am endorsing it in the slightest. If you go by the ranked choice model, that technically means both Smoochum and Gigantamax Melmetal are our worst of the worst.
Then, for the Hall of Tame, well, we've got 24 of them, and here they are on your screen. I just don't feel like reading off those names one by one, but as for trends, in addition to Pokemon who were just kind of generic shapes and blobs, we also tended to give middling scores to Pokemon that we found confused or that just didn't lean into their ideas hard enough. Anyway, as there are 24 Pokemon here, let's highlight the middlest of the middle with the 2 blurst Pokemon. For me, it's Thwackey and Persian, and for Dribson, it's Remoraid and Hitmonlee. If you're curious, my favorite of the Hall of Tamers is Fomantis, and my least favorite is Behiam. Dribson's favorite is Beldum, and his least favorite is Patrat. Some others that scored highly for the both of us are Primarina, Furfrou, and Phione. And last but not least, Dribson and I both nominated our favorite Pokemon from the entire franchise, which are not necessarily from our Hall of Fame since we have plenty of 10s that the other didn't agree on. My personal favorite Pokemon of all time is Umbreon. Eevee itself has always been one of my favorites thanks to how it evolves. In fact, I literally called it my favorite all the way back in the Gen 1 video. But after thinking about it a little more, I realized that the real strength of Eevee lies in those evolutions, and over the course of the series, I gave both Umbreon and Sylveon a 10. But Umbreon grabs me thanks to its simple yet elegant design, its amazing color scheme, and for just how adorable it is. I always run with Umbreon whenever I can, and it is an absolute classic.
Meanwhile, my personal favorite Pokemon of all time is Blaziken. While I don't think that Blaziken was my first ever starter Pokemon, it was the one I used when I first played through Emerald, which is my favorite Pokemon game of all time. I distinctly remember naming it Flame, a name which I carried to all my Torchics since then. While I don't think Blaziken is the absolute greatest Pokemon design of all time, Blaziken is such a special Pokemon to me that I can't pick anything else as my favorite.
Well, that's everything that we felt fit to talk about regarding the Pokemon series. These rating videos have been super fun to make, despite the videos also being very taxing. Especially before I dropped all those complex animations, organizing the script and recording and editing everything was a huge workload, far more than I anticipated. And yeah, these are some of the least viewed videos on my channel, but I'm still glad we did this. Not just because it was fun to talk about the Pokemon, but it was awesome to work on something together with my brother. Speaking of which, got anything to say, Dribson?
Doing this series was quite a lot of fun in retrospect. Since I took care of recording footage of the Pokemon, I was able to go back and play some of the games I haven't touched in years, albeit in a limited capacity for most of them, which is something I like to do every once in a while. I've also gained a newfound respect for a lot of Pokemon, as I would normally only make snap judgments if I liked a Pokemon when I found it in my playthroughs, limiting my exposure to certain Pokemon that I otherwise would really like.
Thanks for being a part of this with me, Dribson, and thank you all so much for watching. If you watched my last video on the Ocarina of Time dungeons or saw my update post, then you know that this channel Cloud Connection is going to end soon as I start another channel under a new name. But I still have one more Cloud Connection video in the works, and it's gonna be a big one. Until then, this is Cloud Connection and dribson signing off.